Okay, what I very quickly would like to do is to just say a few different things, and then see if any of these make sense to you. And they relate to some of the things that have already been said. Wisdom, I think, rather like information, is useless and meaningless unless you do something with it. It's what you do with something. So, as far as I'm concerned, it's very easy for anybody, to talk about wisdom. But there's no correlation between the ability to talk about wisdom and being wise in practice. People are wise in practice because they are able to apply effectively wisdom. Okay. So that's one of the things that I try to see it that way rather than tacit and explicit, to see it's the application of wisdom that we would define somebody as being a wise person because they can apply wisdom. And we talked a bit about philosophers and gurus being concerned with wisdom. Actually, in our organizational context, the real thing that we ought to be talking about is the link between leadership and wisdom. What is it? And how do we ensure, as far as possible, if that's what we want to do, that we have wise leaders? Most people would say that that's what you want. But what does it mean when you look at it? How do you get them? And there is a very strong case for saying the one thing that comes out of it is the capacity to link the past, present and future and be concerned with the wider interest. So, a couple of other things. Wisdom is a saying or an insight that stands the test of time. It's not pretending to be absolute, but it does have to be useful. And it's useful about particular dimensions, as far as I can make out. And maybe when I try to check this out, and we could check this out about your trainer who puts a player on the field, and whether they're actually using it in the right way to start with. Because wisdom is about relationships with ourselves, relationships with other people, and our perceived relationship with the universe as a whole. The big picture. But it's also critically about values. It's not just about information. You can't have a wise motor car, I don't think. Even though somebody might say, use the word in that context. And of course, if you look back in history, one of the difficulties that arose with the scientific revolution and with religion was actually, in my view, they were turning things into wisdom that were actually bits of information. And to try to understand what is it that really is the difference between information, and I like to see knowledge as the use of information, and wisdom is concerned with values and the right use of knowledge, the good use of knowledge. So it's a values-driven concept. And I was talking to David earlier on that if you wanted one of the, I think the most powerful saying that I've come across that brings it into knowledge management is a saying which I've come across. I don't know whether other people have come across, but it's one thing to come across it and to say, yes, that makes sense. It's another thing, does it actually apply in practice? Now this particular saying is, nobody takes any notice of what you say or what you know unless they feel you care. Now, if you found that put that in your own personal test inside organizations or inside your personal lives, that rings true. And that actually very simple point is at the guts of what a lot of what causes problems in organizations. Because people don't think the organization cares, or other people in the organization care. Now, if you go out in a slightly different direction and you look at another issue, which is the issue about knowledge is power. Well, how many people would say that inside their organization knowledge was power? Anybody? Nobody here. Yeah? 1, 2, 3. Surprising. I mean, you're perhaps being reserved because you think you're not very powerful and you're the people who are concerned with knowledge. Maybe there's something there, but I don't know. But usually when I test, if I have the chance to test it out, most people think they're working in an organization where knowledge is power. That sort of cultural dimension. But actually, almost all management techniques work based on the assumption of sharing knowledge. So that if you're trying to operate management techniques, total quality management, learning organizations, knowledge management, as a technical issue, inside an organization where the culture is knowledge is power, basically it's not going to work. And by and large, 50% of the time, management techniques are not considered to be effective inside organizations because there isn't a sharing knowledge culture. Of course, a lot of organizations try to get the best of both worlds. They want people to be competitive, but they want them also to cooperate. But if they don't understand what they're doing and manage that process well, they'll get the worst of both worlds. They won't get the best of both worlds. You've got to. It's not a black and white situation. You can talk about 80-20 splits one way or the other way, but it does make a lot of difference. And there are things that you can do inside organizations to improve the simple things. And we talked a bit about organizations talk about trust, and they talk about these, but they don't ask the question, where does trust come from? And a lot of organizations don't like to talk about the issue that makes most organizations work well is if people inside the organizations consider what's going on to be fair. But how often have you had a discussion about fairness? It's a very difficult issue to discuss, but it is a very important issue that influences our behavior. So there's a lot of values-driven issues around wisdom and what we package inside the whole area of knowledge management, but in a way we don't talk about. And wisdom is a way of trying to talk about values. So really the last thing I want to just do is to put up a challenging idea. We've come across this before: data, information, knowledge and wisdom. Yeah. Right, now look. Right, but we've all come across that before. And it's always puzzled me because it's not a linear movement. There are at least there's some problems with that. And my very simplistic answer to this is that data, well, okay, data is data. Information gives data context. Knowledge is the use of information. So a book about how a motor car works is information. If you use it, you're turning that into knowledge. But the right use of knowledge is wisdom. And that means that in a way, you've got the pyramid the wrong way up. Right? In a way, we start with wisdom. We start with our values, which then sets the framework of what we want to know, or what we want to do, or what we don't want to do. And once we've decided what we want to do, we then work out what information we need in order to do it. And once we decide what information we need, we look for the data. So in a way, that we had the pyramid the wrong way up. And the questions that are important for us are, to start with, our values questions, which are to do with wisdom. And that sets the framework within which we go through the pyramid and focus down on the data we need in order to make our actions as effectively as possible. Now, in theory, of course, you can say you've got a dynamic process there, but I think that in practice, what I've been brought up on is just this simple pyramid, and I've never worked out how it worked. And I still don't, I'm not convinced I've got the answer, but I rather like this way of looking at things. And it also fits into why I think wisdom is important, and why I think we've got to be spending more time moving on, if you like, from the knowledge society or the knowledge economy to the wise economy and the wise society, which is not just to do with doing things, but it's much more concerned with trying to do the right things. And in the end, the right things, or the good things, are values-driven, which is basically what we're trying to encapsulate when we talk about wisdom. Question mark. Okay? And one of the things that I would argue is that reinforces the importance of having wise people at the top. But it also, and this is why I was really very interested in David's work and the knowledge cafe concept, is that in the end, after trying to think about this for a long time, the most important issue in order to improve the quality of your strategy and the quality of your decisions inside an organization, there is one thing above everything else that is critical to the whole process, and that is to improve the quality of the dialogue that takes place between the people inside the organization, the quality of the conversations. And that other people have talked about this, but strategy as conversations and strategy as dialogue and leadership as the facilitator of that process seems to me to be absolutely critical if you're looking for long-term organizational success. And that's why I think that these issues and values issues in strategy is not a technical subject. It happens because people want to make it happen. And people want to make it happen because they're driven by whatever they're driven by, their values. And I was involved with a project that was run by the Chartered Management Institute a little while ago, and we did make sure that the subtitle of this was Leadership, a Challenge for All. And that it's certainly my view that every time we have a relationship with somebody else, or we take a decision about resources, we're involved in leadership issues because we're involved in trying to make things better, but for who? That's all it comes down to. And if you look at a lot of leaders and what the people in the rest of the organisation think of them, there are big question marks about a lot of in whose interests are decisions being taken. And interestingly enough, I looked this up recently, of course you can repackage an awful lot of what we've been talking about as emotional intelligence. But what surprised me in rereading the book about the classic about emotional intelligence was they didn't talk about wisdom. Now, there is a way in which nobody wants to talk about it. But if you're concerned with knowledge management and you're concerned with organizational success, it's there. It might not be called wisdom. You might want to talk about it in terms of values, and values are talked about endlessly now in organizations, but you can actually get a long way in a multicultural environment to actually see that the wisdom that comes from different parts of the world is actually extraordinarily similar. Because it's about people's relationship with themselves, people's relationship with other people, people's relationship with the... It's about the wise use of knowledge. Effective, you have to talk about good, you have to... There's a values issue. And ethical values. Well, you have to say, well, what is ethical? And the issue about, there are very interesting ideas about how you look at ethical decision-making, short-term against long-term, what's the other one, something, justice against retribution, or there's 4 dimensions that you can look at, trying to work out degrees of ethicalness. The only thing you can say about a wise decision is that they try to take the interests of everybody in the context of the long term. Now, that's a sweeping statement. Values do change. And I'm not casting this in stone. I'm just saying that the agenda is one that is concerned with the wider interest, not just you're driven by your own self-interest, because that's going to be the vehicle for destroying relationships, destroying organizations, and destroying societies. Megalomaniacs, dictators have exactly the same behavior, vicious circle. And you are concerned with the long term and not just the short. And I think that's what we're doing here. And we're trying to, and that's what organisations should be doing. And they do. We must be more concerned with what are our values. And now, I would say in the last 20 years, we've seen an enormous takeoff in organisations paying lip service to this. But how real is it? Is it real? Do people believe them? Do we do surveys of what people feel about value statements?